My guest today on the Ryerson negotiation project is Leonard Asper. Welcome, Leonard.
Thank you for having me.
Leonard is the former CEO of CanWest Global Communications Corporation, one of Canada's largest media companies. The company owned 13 daily newspapers, including the National Post, 20 television channels, 18 cable and satellite channels, and internationally, CanWest controlled and operated television networks in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and Chile, with 4 radio networks in Turkey, as well as an I Corporation, a signage company operating in the United States and elsewhere. Today, Mr. Asper is the president and CEO of the Anthem Media Group, which owns the Fight Network, the world's premier television channel dedicated 24/7 to combat sports. Anthem also owns a significant stake in the Pursuit Channel, a U.S.-based hunting and fishing network, and Fantasy Sports Channel, due to be launched in 2013. Welcome once again, Len.
Thank you.
Tell us about this Fantasy Sports Channel. What's that all about?
Well, it has caused some confusion because different people read the word fantasy differently. I think I was telling you earlier, my wife thought it was a porn channel. My sister thought it was dragons fighting unicorns. And so there, but it's actually about people. It's a news service. If you think of Bloomberg, CNN, BNN, CNBC, all in one for people who play fantasy sports. And fantasy sports is where you get to be your own general manager. You pick your team, and you decide who you're going to play and name as your starter each night or day there's a game. So for NFL, for hockey, for baseball, NASCAR, basketball, every sport there is, it's popular. You can be the general manager of your own team. And what's interesting about it is you no longer, if you're a Leafs fan, but you're a fantasy player, you might have a player from the Montreal Canadiens on your team.
God forbid.
And you might, so you want the Leafs to win 5-4, but you want your player on the Canadiens to score 4 goals. So you are sitting there cheering quietly for the Habs guy when they're scoring in Maple Leaf Gardens or in the ACC. But point is, all these people play, they spend a lot of time at it, and the news they want is very different from what Sportsnet or TSN or ESPN will provide. It's much more, I won't get into it here, but it's very, very specific and different. So we're trying to be a complement to those channels. The people don't want to see the game scores or the highlights. They know that already. They want to know who's playing tomorrow, who's starting, who's injured, who's all these other facts about the players.
You've had a fascinating career, and you're in some interesting businesses at the present time. Over the years, you've had to develop different relationships. From your perspective as a senior executive and an entrepreneur, where does relationships fit in the process?
I think it's almost the most important thing you can have. Everybody's smart, information is something that's a commodity. You can get it. You can have the same information as the other person. I think the big delta, the big sort of X factor in success in life in general is the quality of your and the scope of your relationships. Because deals get done based on people trusting each other, people being comfortable with each other, and people just liking each other. I mean, you want to hang out with people you like, especially if you're talking about a partnership. It's one thing where you're buying and selling. You're going to walk away at the end of the day, and someone's bought a house, someone's sold a house. You may never see each other again. But relationships relationships are important in building partnerships, and they're also important in getting deals. Because if someone likes you and they're thinking of selling their business or doing something, they will call the people they like. They will call people they think of. So the people who are top of mind, who they've seen recently.
You use the word trust in the relationship equation. Presumably that factors in quite substantially. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any examples in terms of your own past experiences, current experiences, where you wish to deal with individuals that you find trustworthy, and what do you do to enhance your own trust factor?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can think of 2 examples, one with my father, actually, and one with me, but where something got done because individuals trusted each other. And I'll never forget it. years ago, Conrad Black, this happened twice with Conrad Black and my father. Years ago, Conrad had sold, CanWest used to be a financial services company actually long ago. So Conrad was selling something called Crown Trust at the time, and he and my father actually shook hands outside their office on 10 Toronto Street, and on a price. And but something happened later that made the business more valuable. But Conrad had agreed to a price, and normally what happens, or often what happens, is someone says, well, I didn't know that these profits were going to be up, so I got to charge you more. The price just went up. But that didn't happen. He just said, I shook hands on it, and he is a very honorable guy that way, and he shook hands on it and said, I shook hands, and that's it, so you have that deal. Fast forward 25 years later, and it's 2002 or whatever, and we went to acquire his newspapers, or it's actually 1999, and they had a relationship that got that deal done, because every time, in negotiations you make mistakes. You give something you didn't mean to give away, especially in a complicated, this is a $3.2 billion transaction, multiple moving parts, and you make mistakes, but people will sometimes just say, oh, sorry, you made the mistake, I caught you, you got to live with it. You gave this away, you didn't mean to give it away, but you did, and so too bad. But they had that relationship that said, and there were a few give and takes where they actually looked after each other and said, sorry, you gave it away, but I'm not calling you on that, I'm not taking it, let's not tell the lawyers, and let's not have them start writing stuff down. That happened there, and another one with when we bought Alliance Atlantis, and Michael McMillan was one of the main owners of the business, and he and I just had a relationship, and in the end, when there are lots of people bidding on a property, there are lots of different communications that go on, and it started with us spending a lot of time together talking about CanWest buying Alliance Atlantis. And eventually, because he was a public company, he had to go to an auction, because that's typically what public companies are required to do in order to make sure they get the best price. But because we'd spent probably a month before that auction actually took place, and he was legally allowed to spend that time, he wasn't in any formal process, but I knew enough about the business and about what the opportunity was that we could end up bidding the highest price, because I just had spent a lot of time with him, and I think that relationship that I had with him gave me the confidence in terms of the quality of the business and the opportunities going forward to make sure put forward the strongest bid.
Fascinating. Share with us your preparation. I mean, you're entering in negotiations. You want to buy a particular property. You're negotiating a sponsorship. What sort of preparation would a Len Asper go through in terms of trying to prepare for those kinds of enterprises?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to know as much about the other person across the table as you can, or their company. Do the research. You just have, the very least you can do is arm yourself with as much in the way of facts that you can then cross-tabulate to allow you to know how to approach something. What's their hot spot? What's important to this person? And when you can identify those things, because every negotiation is really sales. You're trying to persuade somebody to do something they might not want to do, or they might want to do, but you want to persuade them to do it the way you want them to do it. So you're in sales. So what's the first rule of sales? You need to know the people you're trying to sell to. I think the other part of that is, but getting more granular, you have to then say, okay, what do I want? What's my wish list of everything I want out of this negotiation? And then you divide that list into two. What's the must-have? What's the like-to-have? And then that's kind of helps you guide yourself in terms of where the concession strategy comes, because then you say, well, I need these 10 things or these 5 things, but I'd like to have these other 10, and that might get into the horse trading after later on down the line. That's where that falls. But you have to know what you must come out of this negotiation with.
So you establish goals?
Yes.
And you have, as part of those goals, you have your concession strategy developed in the sense of priorities and wish list.
Yes. I think it's like building a house. Like, let's say you want to build something. You say, I want to have this house. It's going to be this. It's going to have a hot tub. It's going to, saunas and pool table and granite, whatever, kitchen, and then you start to get the budget in, and you realize but then you come down to what do I have to have? I need to have 2 bathrooms. I need to have, you start to get to the bones of what you must have, and that's when you say, the pool table fell off, didn't get the sauna, but we got 3/4 of what we wanted, and so.
In your past life as a corporate CEO of a major international corporation, how did you develop your mandate to proceed with the acquisition of National Post or Atlantis Alliance? How did you develop that mandate? You were the CEO of a publicly traded company.
Mm-hmm.
How would you develop your mandate to proceed? What were some of the steps you'd had to take?
Well, I think you have to build a big picture strategy first. I think every company has to start with that. What do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? My father used to say, what do we want to be when we grow up? Once you know that, not everything is going to happen the way you want it to. So you have to then be opportunistic, and because everything you want to buy or acquire or partnerships you want to make are not available necessarily at the time you want them. So I always give the example of you're painting a picture. You're doing a painting, and there's going to be a sky, and there'll be, let's say it's an outdoor. There's going to be it's going to be ground. There'll be people. There'll be all these different components of this painting, but you have to know what that painting is going to look like when it's finished. And it may not be quite, no artist sits and says, I know exactly what this painting will look like, but they know pretty close what it's going to look like, and they'll make some decisions on the fly about, they make some changes during the composition, but mostly they know what the picture is going to look like. So once you do that, then you can be opportunistic about when you paint the sky, when you paint the ground, when you paint the people, because they'll not always be available, or the paint colors in this example are not necessarily maybe on sale at the particular time or whatever. So everything doesn't come to you in corporate life as much as the time you want it to. So, but you need to start with what do I want to be in 5 years?
So you have the big picture.
Yes. Yeah.
How would you interact with your board in terms of the big picture in order to proceed?
Well, that's you have to sell them on it. Again, people always think, hey, I'm the CEO, I'm the boss. I can make my own decisions, and that's not ever true. You always have a board. You have, presumably there are other shareholders maybe, and there are clearly there could be bankers involved. You have to. So it's not a question of just the board, but you start with the board because they are there to represent all the stakeholders. But it's a question of you have to go through a process of I think educating them as to so that when you present a strategy, there's got to be a lot of data and information about why you want to pursue this strategy, because
See, many viewers would think that because you are the chairman and the CEO of a corporation, that thank you very much, you just go in and talk to your board and they approve everything and you move on.
Yeah, no, that's just not how it works. No, you have to, look, you can't be an island and an isolated decision maker in your own. I mean, even the people you might read about or see that are sort of their names are always associated with their businesses, Rupert Murdoch and Frank Stronach and people like that. They have people around them that they are convinced. They have people with them, cheering them on and agreeing with what they're going to do. In some cases, where the Frank Stronachs of the world, they are pretty forceful, and they will be very decisive. And there's nothing wrong with being decisive, but you do need to get your stakeholders on board, and that's senior executives, and that's typically bankers, because you depend on them for support more than you realize.
So you're in a process and you're attempting to acquire an asset or whatever it might be. Difficult people on the other side, difficult people on your side. How would a Len Asper deal with difficult people? You can't just, if you're operating on the other side, you can't say, well, I'm just not going to deal with you.
Right. Yeah. My strategy is called the disarming plan, which is just take their negative energy and sort of just disperse it. And one of the great ways to do that is with humor. And usually people who are angry or ornery or hard to deal with there's something bothering them. Try to find out what it is. Try to get inside their head a little bit and try to address that.
Has that worked well for you?
Yeah, it has. I think, but I think, you know, coming back to, I've seen it with Peter Viner, who worked with us for, you know, a long, long time, and you know, he was just brilliant at getting the other person who, I've seen him get the most angry people laughing. I mean, like really laughing, like rolling on the floor laughing, and and that's, you know, he was a long-time salesperson. That's why he was so successful. But I think just instead of trying to be, you can't be confrontational with a difficult person. That will just create two negatives, and it'll just be a completely polar situation where it'll go the other way, and it'll go quickly. It just does not work. You have to just ignore it, and always be positive. And I think a lot of times I've seen negative people or angry people, or you know, which is really why people are difficult. There's usually some reason they're being difficult, and I've seen them really come around many times just by the other person not taking the bait and just continuing to be nice and positive.
Share with us the Len Asper style of communications. What kind of style of communications has worked well for you because you've been so successful over the years?
Well, I think it's always, for me, it's a combination of email and voice, like direct, both in person, you know, phone calls and direct, you know, personal communication. It depends what the objective is, really. I use email so that my points are clear, and when, especially with, actually one way of sometimes I deal with difficult people, like one version of a difficult person is a person who interrupts a lot, and you can never get your point in. And so you keep having these discussions, and they keep interrupting you, and it never goes anywhere. And so I find sometimes writing a nice, very clear, long email very specific, you know, helps get them to understand what you're trying to say. But I find that, in general, email is very useful when you need to make points, and you especially expect that the points you're raising are going to come up again and again in conversation. So you want to have a record. In a lot of cases, you want to build a record of what you are saying and what they're saying and all that. In terms of getting things done, that comes back to personal relationships and the phone calls. That you just pick up the phone and say, okay, I've said what I said in my email. You've had a chance to read this. Okay, let's discuss. But I always find a discussion is better to follow a very clear email.
So that email sort of serves as an agenda.
Yes, it sets the stage for the discussion.
And then you know that the other person has read it,
yes,
as opposed to have listened to it.
Yes, and possibly not heard it, you know, and because they were trying to speak over you. So I mean, that's partly my legal training too. As a lawyer, I always find you know, and so many times in life you go back and say, well, you know, what did someone actually say? Well, nobody can remember what someone said, but they can look at an email. And so you just don't want to look tricky or, you know, cute because as soon as people feel you're trying to trap them, you know, legally, and trying to write contracts out or write out statements of claim, essentially, that's when I think they get their backs up. So a great way to start an email is, hey, look, I just wanted to clarify where things are at. You know, colon. You know, one, you know, we're doing this. Is that? Why don't we have a call to discuss?
So tell us about your listening skills. Are they good listening skills? Have you practiced that over the years?
I try to listen. I'm very, I remember we went to a family business forum years ago. And it was the only one we ever went to because we thought they were actually a waste of time. But my dad did anyway. But actually, I think we all felt it was a bit overkill. But we went to one, and they had this thing called the rubber chicken. And they said the biggest problem with family businesses is everybody talks over each other. So they had us sitting around, and if somebody held the rubber chicken, you know, the other person couldn't talk. And so that really made an impression on me because it completely changed our discussion because we had been talking over each other. And it typically happens in any business setting. When you have 5, 6, 7 people, even on the same team in the room, trying to solve a problem, there's always 1 or 2 people that don't listen. They either don't listen or they interrupt. So I've really tried to focus on letting someone finish their sentence. And then I always say, and sometimes I clarify to say, sorry, was that everything you want to say? Are you finished? Sorry, I interrupted you. Did I interrupt you? And you make sure that that person feels, that they got out what they want to say. I think it's really, again, creates really positive energy in the room and positive, go forward feeling that when people feel they were listened to, and it's very negative when people feel they weren't listened to. They get very frustrated. You can see them boiling up,
So interruptions is something that you've had to deal with in your career, and that's certainly a very effective way in which to deal with them, is come back with the email, particularly if you're in the negotiations with them.
Yeah, yeah. Especially you leave the room to this night, the meeting ended early, you make a little bit of an excuse. We didn't get a chance to discuss everything. I just thought I would just make sure I understood where you were coming from. Use a line like that, and then just, and then just lay it out. And then they get a chance to respond, and you create this email dialogue, and then you get to a point where at some point it's worth picking up the phone, you pick up the phone again, but you clear away some of the brush.